We're back on our set of lessons on the judiciary. But to begin with, we need to know about this, statute law. Okay, we're going to do a retrieval on that. Can you write 4 quality sentences when meant by this term? Think of examples, support your explanation, and to help you to find out about this secret stuff. Urban Cookie Collective, definitely worthwhile. Pause now. Okay, how well did you do? Let's have a look at this. Now, if you look at mine, you can see the red are the key terms we're looking for. Statute law being approved by Parliament, contrasting the common law and conventions. For example here, Parliament Act 911, Fixed Term Parliament Act more recently. But crucially, statute law taking precedence over other sources due to parliamentary sovereignty. These are all the key aspects of it. And it's relevant, of course, because that's what the Supreme Court is judging upon. And that's what we're focusing on pretty much today. So if we look at our spec, you can see the things in purple that we've done in lesson 1 and the things in red that we're focusing on today. Heavy focus on judicial review and the constitutional position of the Supreme Court and how that's been challenging over the last few years. So where does that fit in our lessons? Today we're reviewing the composition, we're going into judicial review much more, got a little task on Tom's article, and we're going to prepare for a 9-mark question. Going to need these. This is Lesueur's notes. We need Tom's article out. Okay, and then we'll be ready to go. So, how'd you get on? Well, you did a little bit of research into the composition, the nature of the court, and what it does. Well, to say it's the highest court in the land is correct, of course. What's interesting where it says they are the ultimate check and balance in the UK's laws and constitution. If you think about that, of course, we have parliamentary sovereignty. So be careful, because Parliament, of course, is the ultimate power. And what the Supreme Court does is it works within what Parliament passes. So really, it's the ultimate check and balance on the UK government. Who's in the court? How reflective are they of the UK society? Well, if you look at these guys, they all are pretty middle-aged, they're all white, and they're all pretty grey. Okay, most of them are men. In fact, I could be here quite easily. So, what does that show us? Well, not necessarily a problem unless you're concerned about the image of the Supreme Court, and that might become more critical as time goes by and their profile increases. That's a good point of discussion when we look at the United States as a comparison. They, of course, are chosen through the Senate. Okay, the President nominates, the Senate appoints. Here, we have a completely different system, which suggests that perhaps the system is less political because it's less transparent, it's less involvement of Parliament, none at all in fact. And perhaps that's a sign that it is a less political system. That again is a good question for the future when we compare to the United States. The other thing you're doing when you're looking at Lesueur's articles, what I've done here is giving you some guidance to make sure your notes are up to scratch. So have a look at your notes now and see if they're aligned with what I thought was important. First of all, the 2 trends, greater profile, greater independence with the emergence of the Supreme Court. Secondly, the different ways in which judicial review can occur. And these are important terminology you need to be aware of. Okay, so the first one, which is ultra vires, means a public authority, that's the government, is acting illegally beyond the powers that Parliament has actually given it through statute. If it works beyond those powers, the Supreme Court can use review against it. Okay, also, if they're acting unfairly or irrationally in the decisions making that they can do, that can be taken to the Supreme Court too, and the government will have to change its actions. I think more crucially is the last two here, where we can see the Human Rights Act and EU law have emerged over the last 20 years, 30 years, to actually become much more prevalent in the role of the Supreme Court. So, what evidence is that judicial review has actually increased over time? Well, within the article, you could see that there was a growth. For now, it could be described as systematic and pervasive in the public policy process, whereas being sporadic and peripheral before. I think that's important to see that change, and that was a good 15 years ago. So what we can see now is even more prominence for the Supreme Court in the judicial review decisions. These are based around the fact that public bodies, such as the government, must act within the limits of the law. Individuals are free to do what they like. Public bodies must do what they're legally allowed to do. If not, the Supreme Court can use judicial review. Also, their actions must sit within EU law, Human Rights Act, or if they're using delegated legislation, it must also be legal. And if they go beyond that, as shown in the Javid case, that can be struck down by the court as well. So as we can see here, judicial review, according to Lesueur, has certainly emerged and grown over time, certainly much more prominent than it was before, and will help us to answer the analysis of how Supreme Court judicial review can occur. Now today, I want you to focus on this task. Adam Thomas wrote in 2017 about judicial review, about the controversy that existed then, why it's become essential, gave some good examples of that, but also raised objections and the counter arguments to judicial review, which are over here. It's an excellent article, definitely worth reading and noting before we get into looking at the question. This is your task for today. It should take you about 15 minutes. I'll go down now. Okay, if you want some additional reading in regards to the judicial review and the role that the Supreme Court plays, there's an article here that you can read which talks about the Supreme Court's role in defining the power between UK and devolved assemblies. And these two, this one talks about the way in which the Supreme Court can define exactly what devolved assembly powers are, in this case the Scottish Parliament, or here, talking about the powers that departments have looking after individuals. All good examples and can build up your schema if you wish to read those. But our main task in preparation for the next lesson is a 9-mark question. You've done lots of preparation now in judicial review. The question is, explain and analyze 3 ways in which it can occur. Well, here's some structure for you to use. The first point, we'd have to say it's when governments act illegally. So they're moving beyond what's allowed to be done because of their statute powers. This is called ultra vires, and that should be explained here with examples if you can. I think the analysis is how significant that's become over time, the number of cases that have emerged, and also whether or not the government actually responds to them effectively. That's where your analysis can lie. Second point, judicial review now occurs because they breach the Human Rights Act. The best examples exist in box 2 of Lesueur's article on page 15. Your analysis is probably looking at the fact that this has become an increased area of judicial review because pressure groups now see it as an opportunity to protect individuals' rights. And that makes it difficult for the government. And of course, because they're trying to obviously look after the nation's interests and national security, now has to be balanced against individual protection of rights. Third point, judicial review can occur when the government breaches EU law. Explaining examples, the fact-the-same example in Lesueur's article does the job there, explaining how the government or previous legislation does not fit in with EU regulation. However, your analysis, of course, will discuss the relevance of that in the context of Brexit, how important that's going to be as time moves forward, and the role the Supreme Court will play in judicial review in the new relationship with the European Union. It's a challenge for you, but you're well capable of doing that. Your 3 points, please. Put together, send to me. Good luck.